I opened my eyes in the ICU and saw a note on the nightstand. Mom, we went to Orlando for 12 days. Hope you'll feel better when we're back. The date on it matched the day my heart had stopped and the machines had kept me breathing. My chest tightened and the only words that came out were, "You left me to die." The hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the faint antiseptic smell felt suddenly obscene, as if the room itself were witness to the small, ordinary cruelty. I taught English for 32 years, grammar, poetry, the quiet pleasure of a properly placed comma. I had raised my 2 children alone, pulled them out of debts, kept the house that had warm corners and the same chipped blue teacup on the sill. Emily and her husband Tom lived off my steadiness. I paid bills, babysat, wiped up the late-night coffee stains from their kitchen table. The pattern of small dismissals began as a slow erosion. Missed texts, promises to take care of it next week. Holidays that turned into errands for them and costs for me. I remembered Tom at dinner once, shrugging and saying, "Maybe we should think about a smaller house soon." I laughed then and told him not to be ridiculous. It sounded practical and harmless, like talk between neighbors. Later the laugh felt like a warning I'd been too polite to hear. The sort of sentence that slides into conversation and shapes a future without anyone raising a hand. The wedding photos were tucked away in a box before I noticed. Strangers' bills appeared on my kitchen table like unwanted mail, each one a small, sharp declaration that something had changed. The nurse taped a sensor back onto my finger and asked if I wanted the TV on. I shook my head. I wanted silence enough to hear my own breath, to feel the shape of the note's letters cutting into me. Emily's looping handwriting, the smiley face after 12 days. The little sun over the O in Orlando, cheerful ink on a graceless day. By afternoon the monitors steadied. I asked for my phone. It lay in a plastic bag with my clothing. There were messages from the retirees group. "We're praying June." And one voicemail from Pastor Lee. Nothing from Emily. Nothing from Tom. I replayed their last visit. A week before surgery, Emily stacking my mail. "Mom, don't worry about the forms," she said. "Tom will help." Tom nodded. A practiced nod that always looked like agreement and never felt like responsibility. "We'll bring you to check in and handle the signatures," he added. The pen felt heavy. The consent forms multiplied. I trusted family more than the page. When Ray called, my former student-turned-attorney, I told him I was fine. He heard the lie. "Miss June, do you want me to stop by?" "You don't have to." "I know," he said, and came anyway. He sat, and after a while I said, "They went to Florida." He read the note. "May I take a photo?" "For your case. For your memory." He clicked and asked about admission day. I told him. The early hour, the fasting, Emily's hand squeezing mine, Tom speaking to a woman in a blazer near registration. A clipboard that kept growing. My signature slanting downhill as the pre-medication loosened my fingers. "Did they ask you for a power of attorney?" he said. "I signed something," I answered. I assumed it was routine. Routine for whom? He wrote the date and time. "We'll get the intake file." 2 days later they discharged me with a pamphlet and a stern list. No lifting, no driving, no stress. A volunteer wheeled me to the curb. Ray waited by his car. "Do you want to stop at the house?" he asked. "Or stay at my sister's a night?" "Home," I said. "I need to see it with my own eyes." Harbor Street was quiet in that heavy Ohio way. When Ray turned into my driveway, I knew. The curtains were gone. The porch planter stood empty. My welcome mat, mind your grammar, was rolled like a discarded magazine. Inside smelled of lemon cleaner and cold air. The living room was staged. Beige throw bowl of fake apples, a generic print of sailboats. Family photos were missing, replaced by mirrors angled to catch light and hide history. On the coffee table lay a charcoal folder labeled with my name. Inside, the first page was a completed power of attorney listing Emily as agent and Tom as alternate. The date was the day of my surgery. The signature was mine. The pen stroke faltered where the anesthesia must have turned my hand to fog. A sticky note read, "Just in case. Easier for bills. Love it." Beneath it, an MLS draft. Charming family home, Springfield, Ohio $249,000, with photographs of my room stripped of soul. My knees went loose. I sat on the floor among boxes labeled miscellaneous. And donate. I touched the edge of a frame that once held Emily at 7, now empty. I said quietly and then louder. You left me to die. And the words rang back at me from the staged walls. Ray crouched beside me. We're going to handle this, he said. He scanned the papers corners to corners. This is their handwriting on the note. This is your signature, but the circumstances. He didn't finish. He set each page back exactly, like evidence at a careful crime scene. In the kitchen on the counter where the cookie jar used to live, a pile of bills waited. Some were mine. Some bore a stranger's name with my address. A cable package I'd never ordered. A contractor's estimate for staging consultation. A receipt for 2 plane tickets to Orlando, timestamped 6:11 a.m. The day of my surgery. The quiet at the start of a test settled in me. The answers would be in the papers. Ray opened the junk drawer. My checkbook was gone. The spare car key was missing. On the calendar, a circle around closing. 2 weeks from now. In the bedroom, my wedding dress box had been moved, the tape retaped poorly. A scarf David gave me. A thin red silk was folded wrong. What do you want to do first? Ray asked from the doorway. I want my name back, I said. We started with the obvious. Ray photographed every page and requested the hospital intake file. He drafted a letter revoking any purported authority and emailed it to the bank manager I'd known for years. Subject line: Urgent, Elder Account Protection. I called the number on the back of my debit card and asked for a freeze. The woman on the line read the last 5 transactions. 2 were mine. 3 were not. I declined each. Ray handed me a pen, the simple black one from the mug with the chipped blue rim. Sign here, he said, to appoint me as counsel of record. The weight felt right. I signed my name the way I teach children to do it. Clear, deliberate, mine. The days that followed blurred into a quiet storm of papers, phone calls, and decisions that had to be made quickly and without hesitation. I had always lived my life in tidy rhythms. Lesson plans, grocery lists, the morning crossword with coffee in my blue-chipped mug. Now every hour brought a new revelation of what Emily and Tom had done in my absence. Each discovery was another stone dropped into water, the ripples touching everything I thought was mine. At the bank, the manager, Mr. Lewis, met me in his office. He had taught Sunday school when Emily was little. He kept his voice careful. June, these transfers, were they authorized? I looked at the statement he slid across the desk. The printout showed withdrawals of $1,200, $3,600, and then $10,000 within a single week. My name was on each line, but the signatures were jagged imitations. I pressed my finger against the glass frame of his diploma on the wall, grounding myself. No, I said. Freeze everything. Today. Mr. Lewis nodded. Consider it done. Ray drafted letters late into the evening. He explained each step as though teaching me a new subject, though the subject was my own life. Revocation of power of attorney. Request for full accounting. Notification to the title company that no sale was authorized. He made copies of everything, tucking them into a binder marked J. Matthews Private. At night I sat in the empty staged living room, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. The walls reflected back a stranger's version of my home. I traced the edge of the MLS flyer with my finger, its glossy photograph showing my dining room stripped of the lace tablecloth and the vase of lavender I always kept there. Charming family home, it promised. I whispered to the paper, not yours to sell. The investigation revealed more. Emily had rerouted my mail to a P.O. box in her name. Tom had contacted a realtor posing as my caretaker, giving himself access to schedule showings. One email thread, forwarded by mistake to Ray, described my house as an easy flip, estate situation, seller motivated. I was not an estate. I was breathing, sitting at my own table, reading their words as though I were already gone. The betrayal grew heavier when I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside, my late husband's letters were gone. Only the ribbon that had bound them remained, frayed at the edges. I sat on the floor with the ribbon in my lap, the smell of cedar sharp in the air, and felt the loss as a second funeral. I did not cry. I folded the ribbon, placed it back, and closed the lid. Some wounds did not need witnesses. When the realtor called, unaware of the freeze, we let the phone ring. Ray instructed me to record every voicemail. One message played in Tom's voice. Mom, we just thought this would be easier for you. Don't make it harder than it has to be. His tone was not cruel, just efficient, as though dismantling my life was a favor he was owed credit for. Emily's message followed, softer. Please trust us. We'll explain when we're back. She said back, as though I were an old chair to be returned to, not a woman who had nearly died. I made my decision the following morning. I packed a single suitcase, 2 cardigans, 3 blouses, my walking shoes, and the red silk scarf David once gave me, folded neatly at the bottom. I carried the chipped blue mug wrapped in a dish towel. The rest could be sold or donated. The house no longer felt like mine. It had been staged for strangers, stripped for profit. Let them see what it meant to strip themselves of me as well. Ray drove me to a notary where I signed the final revocation forms. Each signature felt like a small reclamation, a thread sewn back into the fabric of my name. This is the last one, he said, sliding the final page across. After this, they have nothing. I signed, the pen steady in my hand. Then I have everything, I replied. We listed the house under my own name, properly this time, and within weeks it sold. Not for their price but for mine. The proceeds went into an account they could never touch. When the sale closed, I stood in the empty living room one last time. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, but beneath it lingered the memory of lavender, of birthday candles, of school essays graded at the dining table. I whispered goodbye to the walls, not to the betrayal but to the years that had once been good. By the time Emily and Tom returned from Orlando, the house was gone. Their keys no longer fit any lock. The neighbors had already spoken. Whispers carried at the grocery store, the post office, the church pews. People called them the children who betrayed their mother. They found bank accounts closed, credit cards declined, and the story spreading faster than their denials could contain it. Tom's business faltered without the quiet subsidies I had provided. Emily's job ended when her employer heard the rumors and questioned her integrity. They had built their security on me, and when I stepped away, their scaffolding collapsed. I did not wait to see their faces. I had already left. My suitcase was light, my ticket one way. I chose Harborview, Oregon, a small town where the sea's salt air carried promise of something new. I rented a small trailer on the edge of town, nothing grand but wholly mine. The first night I made tea in the chipped blue mug and opened the window to hear the ocean's hush. Sounded like freedom. In Harborview, life slowed to a rhythm that asked nothing of me but presence. The trailer was modest, 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a porch that overlooked a line of evergreens. I kept my few possessions in order. The red silk scarf folded in a drawer, the chipped blue mug by the sink, the binder of documents locked in a small fireproof box. Each object reminded me that survival was not abstract. It was the daily choosing of myself over those who once assumed ownership of my life. The mornings began with the sound of gulls. I would brew tea, sit at the small table and write in a notebook. Not a diary exactly, more a record of the quiet truths I had ignored for too long. I wrote down what had been said to me in offhand tones. Maybe you don't need such a big house. Mom will handle the mail. Don't worry about the paperwork. Small sentences that seemed harmless in the moment but built into a structure of erasure. I read them back and felt the weight of recognition. Words had always been my work, and now they became my witness. It was at the local library where I first met Laura. She was arranging a display of children's books when I asked about volunteer opportunities. Her smile was quick and genuine. "We always need readers," she said. "Do you like stories?" I told her I had taught English for 3 decades. She introduced me to her daughter Sue, a girl of 8 with hair the color of autumn leaves and a habit of clutching a small stuffed rabbit. Sue hid behind her mother at first, then peeked at me. "Would you read to me?" she asked. Her voice was shy but clear. The next week I returned to the library, and Sue was waiting with Charlotte's Web in her hands. I read aloud, my voice steady, the rhythm familiar from years in classrooms. As I spoke, I saw her shoulders relax, her grip on the rabbit ease. Laura listened from the side, her eyes soft. Afterward, Sue whispered, "Thank you, Miss June." The name settled around me like a shawl. I had not been called by my first name with such respect in years. Word spread quickly in a town that valued community. Soon I was reading weekly, not only to Sue but to a small group of children who gathered on the rug with wide eyes. Parents thanked me. One afternoon, Laura brought me a jar of homemade jam. "You've given Sue something steady," she said. "She doesn't have grandparents nearby. You filled a space." I held the jar in both hands, feeling its warmth through the glass. For the first time in a long while, I was valued not for money or a house, but for presence, patience, and voice. Meanwhile, Emily and Tom's calls began. First, they were measured. "Mom, we need to talk." "We didn't mean." The voicemails grew longer, pleading. "Please just hear us out. We can explain." When I did not respond, the tone shifted. "You've ruined us. How could you?" Their voices cracked with anger, then softened again with apology. Each message was a pendulum swinging between guilt and need. I listened once, then deleted. I had nothing left to give them. Not explanation, not rescue. Neighbors in Springfield wrote me letters. One said, "We're ashamed of what they did. Everyone knows the truth." Another enclosed a clipping from the local paper, a brief notice about Tom's business bankruptcy. I folded the letters and placed them in the binder, not out of spite but as record. Truth required evidence, and I had learned not to discard proof. In Harborview, my life stitched itself back together. I planted lavender in a pot on the porch. Its scent carried me back to evenings when my house was still mine, but this time the memory was not heavy, it was continuity. I joined a quilting circle at the community center. The women there did not ask about my past, they asked about my stitches. We sat together, hands busy, stories drifting across the table like threads. When I told them I had been a teacher, one woman said, "That explains your neat corners." It was a small compliment, but it reached me deeply. One afternoon, while walking along the harbor, I saw a family posing for photographs, parents laughing, children chasing gulls. I did not feel envy. I felt release. My family had chosen to betray me, and I had chosen to survive. That was the equation, simple and exact. I carried no hatred, only boundary. To forgive would mean opening the door to their use of me again. To refuse was not bitterness, it was preservation. When Emily finally wrote a letter, it was brief. "We are sorry. We lost everything. Please let us come see you." I held the paper, recognizing the handwriting that once had drawn suns over the O's. I folded it without reply. Silence became my answer, the strongest sentence I could offer. At night, I sat on the porch with tea, the lavender close by, the ocean steady in the distance. The air was cool, and the scarf around my shoulders was soft. I thought of the ICU, the note on the nightstand, the staged house stripped of memory. I thought of Sue's voice calling me Miss June, of Laura's jam jar, of the quilt squares stitched with patience. Betrayal had been my undoing, but it had also been the start of my own choosing. They had tried to bury me in papers, signatures, and staged rooms. But I had stepped out, carrying nothing but myself. That was enough. Backhand index pointing right if this touched a nerve. You belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. The sea in Harborview became my clock. At dawn it breathed in fog, by noon it glittered. And in the evenings it turned heavy and dark, like velvet pulled across the horizon. Each day I walked the pier, a notebook in my pocket, writing down the fragments of thought that came and went. I was not rebuilding the life I had lost. I was shaping one that had never existed before. A life that belonged to me alone. Laura and Sue often joined me. Sue's small hand would curl into mine as she skipped beside me, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. "Do you miss your old house?" she asked once. The question startled me, spoken so plainly. I considered before answering. "No," I said at last. "I miss what it used to feel like, but not what it became." She nodded, as though she understood more than her years allowed. Children see truth without the need for polish. One evening, Laura invited me to supper. Her kitchen smelled of rosemary and bread, and her table was set with mismatched plates that looked more welcoming than any showroom could. After dinner, she poured tea and asked gently, "Do you hear from them?" "Yes," I said. "Voicemails. Letters. And will you answer?" I looked at the steam curling from the cup. "No. Because answering would mean reopening the wound. Silence is the only protection I have left." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Then keep your silence. You've earned it." It was not forgiveness I sought, nor revenge. What I wanted was balance. The betrayal had stripped me of certainty, But in its place I found steadiness. In the quilt circle, women began to ask my opinion on patterns. At the library, children listened for my voice as though it were part of the story itself. Even at the market, the clerk would smile when I came in asking, "How's the lavender growing?" Small recognitions built a new belonging. The binder of documents remained with me. It lived on the bottom shelf beside the dictionary I had used in classrooms. Sometimes I opened it, not to dwell but to remind myself, evidence matters. Too many women I had known let things slip through fingers, unpaid debts, promises never written down, agreements made in kitchens instead of on paper. I would not repeat that. Proof was my inheritance and I guarded it. Months passed and autumn came. Leaves turned brittle along the sidewalks, and the air sharpened. I was reading Anne of Green Gables aloud when Sue interrupted me. "Miss June," she whispered, "are you my grandma now?" The question landed softly but firmly. I looked at her, at the way her small face tilted with hope. "If you'd like me to be," I said. She grinned satisfied. "Then you are." That evening when I walked home, the stars were sharp and clear. I thought of Emily, her face as a child, her hand in mine at the hospital, the handwriting on that cruel note. She had once called me her anchor. But when the storm came, she cut the rope. Still I carried no hatred, only distance. Boundaries are not built from anger. They are built from self-respect. The last letter arrived near Christmas. It came in an envelope with no return address, but I knew the hand immediately. Emily wrote, "Mom, we lost everything. We are sorry. Please at least let us see the grandchildren with you. They miss you too." I folded the letter and placed it in the binder with the others. I thought of Sue's question, her smile when I said yes. I already had grandchildren, chosen ones. Family is not blood, family is care. On Christmas Eve, Laura and Sue brought me a gift. A knitted shawl the color of winter sky. "It's from both of us," Laura said. Sue added, "Now you'll be warm when we walk to the library." I wrapped it around my shoulders. It was lighter than the red silk scarf but warmer, woven with deliberate stitches. "Thank you," I whispered. That night, sitting by the small tree I had decorated with seashells, I realized something. Survival was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. I had been given back my own voice, and I intended to use it, to tell, to teach, to warn. Silence had been my prison once. Now it was my shield. So I began writing these accounts. Not to shame, not to wound, but to preserve truth. Because every detail matters. The time on a receipt, the stroke of a signature, the absence of a voice at a hospital bedside. Betrayal hides in small things, and only when gathered together do they reveal their weight. To those who listen, I say this: protect your name, your keys, your papers. But more than that, protect your peace. No one has the right to strip you of it. They tried to bury me in silence, but I used that silence to build strength. Backhand index pointing right if this story touched a nerve. You belong here. Subscribe and hear more truths where survival becomes voice. Winter in Harborview was quiet, not harsh like Ohio but damp, with mist that crept along the harbor and left beads of water on the window screens. I learned the pattern of the tides, how they mirrored the rhythm of breath. In, out, return. Life, I realized, was much the same. I began teaching again, though not in a classroom. At the library, Laura arranged for a small adult literacy group. 3 women and 1 man came each week, sitting with notebooks and pencils. Their hands trembled at first, embarrassed by the gaps in their skills. I told them, "Mistakes are proof that you are trying." The phrase, once spoken to children, landed here with new weight. Watching their faces brighten when they read a paragraph aloud was like seeing lanterns lit in a dark street. At the quilting circle, I stitched slowly, careful with every corner. My squares were not the brightest, but they were steady. One woman said, "Your work is calm." That word stayed with me. Calm. Not broken, not bitter. Calm. Still the past tugged. One morning at the post office, I overheard 2 tourists mention Orlando. My chest tightened before I could stop it. I remembered the note on the nightstand, the cheerful sun drawn above the O. I walked home quickly, clutching my bag. Once inside, I made tea and sat by the lavender pot. I reminded myself, the past is a document filed and closed. The binder held it. My life held more. Letters continued, though fewer now. Tom wrote once in a tone sharp with blame. "You abandoned us. he said. I read it twice, then slipped it into the binder. Abandonment, I thought, was leaving your mother in a hospital bed while flying to theme parks. Silence again was my only answer. By spring, my days filled naturally. Sue's school asked if I would judge a poetry contest. I accepted. The entries were simple, full of rhymes about flowers and pets. But one line from a boy's poem struck me. Home is the place that lets me breathe. I copied it into my notebook. That was the truth I had searched for. Not walls, not deeds, not signatures. Breathing. I saved money from tutoring and reading sessions. It was not much, but enough to feel choice in my pocket. One Saturday, I bought myself a second-hand armchair, upholstered in green fabric. I carried it into the trailer, set it by the window, and draped the red silk scarf over its back. The chair became my corner for reading, writing, and thinking. A small claim, but mine entirely. Community grew around me like ivy, steady and quiet. Laura often brought over soup, Sue left drawings taped to my door, and the quilting women included me in their potlucks. I had no family photos on the wall, but I did not feel the absence. My walls held drawings, quilts, and notes of thanks from those who valued me as I was. One evening, while walking by the harbor, I saw a mother calling after her teenage son. Her voice was sharp, weary. The boy turned back, scowling, then softened, and together they laughed. It struck me then. Family is not perfect harmony. It is struggle, forgiveness, and presence. I had offered those things until they were used against me. Now I offered them only where they would be honored. News from Ohio reached me occasionally. A neighbor wrote that Emily and Tom had sold their car, moved into a rental, and were rarely seen in town. The phrase in the letter was blunt. People don't forget. I folded it, placed it in the binder, and closed the cover. Their consequences were theirs alone. As for me, I began to plan. Not just days, but years. I thought of trips I might take. The coastal train north, the gardens in Portland, even a summer course at the university just to sit among books again. For the first time, the future felt like a window open instead of a door closed. And so I lived quietly but with intention. I spoke softly, I wrote steadily, and I carried the truth of my own endurance. The betrayal no longer defined me. What defined me was what came after. The lavender blooming on the porch, the children's laughter at story time, the calm square of fabric stitched into a larger quilt. They had left me once, assuming I would have no life without them. What they did not know was that life, once reclaimed, grows stronger at its roots. Summer in Harborview carried a softness that Ohio summers never had. Instead of heavy heat and buzzing cicadas, the days here were washed in ocean air. The evenings cooled by wind that rattled the branches of the pines. I woke each morning to the sound of gulls and the faint rustle of water against the pier. For the first time in years, I felt no dread when opening my eyes. I began keeping a garden beside the trailer. Nothing elaborate, just herbs in pots, a row of marigolds, and a patch of lavender that thrived in the salt air. Each morning I stepped outside barefoot, watered them, and brushed my fingers against the leaves. The smell lingered on my skin like memory. Neighbors walking past would wave and call, "Looks lovely, June." Their voices felt like anchors, tethering me to the present. At the library, my circle of children grew. Sue was always there, rabbit in hand, but now a dozen others crowded around each week. Some leaned against my chair, others sprawled on the rug, all waiting for the rhythm of my voice. Reading to them filled a place in me that had once been hollow. I realized then that teaching had never been only about grammar or literature. It had been about presence, about making space where others felt safe to learn. That gift still belonged to me. Laura often stayed after sessions, and together we shelved books or discussed which stories would spark the children's imaginations. Our friendship deepened quietly. She never pressed me for details of my past, only listened when I chose to share. One evening she brought me a photograph of Sue holding up a certificate for Best Poem. "She wouldn't have written it without you," Laura said. I looked at the picture, Sue's grin wide and proud, and felt a swell of something I had thought lost, joy without condition. But the past still echoed. One afternoon while sorting old documents, I found a photo of Emily as a child, her hair in braids, her hand clutching mine. The image caught me off guard. I sat at the table staring at it, remembering the weight of her small body on my lap, the nights I stayed awake through her fevers, the sacrifices folded quietly into bills and long hours. Betrayal did not erase those years. It only hardened their contrast. Love given freely later met with calculation. I slipped the photo into the binder with the others, not out of anger but to keep the record whole. The phone rang less often. Emily's number appeared only once in spring, then not again. Letters dwindled. Silence at last returned as my own. And in that silence I felt space to dream again. I took my first trip that July. A train north to Astoria, a small coastal town with painted houses and steep streets. I packed lightly. One cardigan, my notebook, the chipped blue mug wrapped carefully. On the train I watched the coastline slide by, the ocean flashing silver between trees. Freedom did not feel like triumph, it felt like breath, easy and unforced. In Astoria I visited a maritime museum, wandered streets lined with murals, and ate clam chowder at a cafe where no one knew my name. Sitting there, spoon in hand, I realized anonymity could be grace. To be unremarkable, to belong nowhere in particular, was its own kind of safety. When I returned, Harborview felt more mine than ever. Neighbors asked about the trip, the children wanted to know what I had seen, and Laura laughed when I told her about nearly tripping on a cobblestone street. Life was building itself not in grand gestures but in steady layers. Lavender blooming, books read aloud, quilts stitched, trains boarded. One evening while sewing at the community center, a woman named Ruth asked, "Do you ever regret cutting them off?" Her tone was curious, not judgmental. I considered. "No," I said slowly. "Regret would mean I still wished for their closeness. What I wish for now is peace. And I have it." She nodded. "That's strength." Strength. A word I had rarely used for myself. Yet it fit. Not like a shield but like a quiet truth. As summer waned, I bought myself a camera, secondhand but reliable. I began photographing small things. The curve of a shell, the angle of light through trees, Sue's rabbit propped on a windowsill. I printed the photos and pinned them to the wall above my desk. My trailer, once sparse, now reflected a life built by choice. The binder remained closed most days, but I kept it visible, a reminder of what vigilance had saved me from. It was not bitterness I carried but awareness, and in awareness I found freedom. They had once left me in a hospital bed, believing I would remain weak, dependent, silent. But each morning in Harborview proved otherwise. I had built something stronger. A life measured not in what was taken, but in what I chose to keep. Autumn returned with rain that stitched the harbor into a pewter sheet. I woke to the tap of drops on the roof and the faint hiss of tires on the road. The trailer felt warmer than it had last year, as if my steady routines had insulated the thin walls. I brewed tea, wrapped the winter sky shawl around my shoulders, and opened my notebook to a fresh page. The blue mug left a ring that dried into a pale halo. I kept it there, a small tide mark of the morning. At the library, Laura asked if I would lead a Saturday workshop for caregivers. "It's mostly women," she said. "Daughters, aunts, neighbors holding everything up." I hesitated, then agreed. The room filled with quiet faces. I spoke about checklists, spare keys, the importance of keeping one's own name on accounts. I did not tell my whole story. I offered procedures instead of pain. A woman with silver hair said, "No one ever told me I could say no." I looked at her and answered, "You can." Sue sat in the back coloring a lighthouse. When the workshop ended, she ran up and slipped her drawing into my hand. "So you won't get lost," she said. I folded the page and slid it into the notebook. The red scarf at my throat felt like a ribbon tied to a gate, bright, ordinary, a marker that the way forward stayed open. News from Ohio arrived not as letters but as rumor. A former colleague emailed that Emily had moved again, closer to the city, and that Tom's work remained uncertain. There was no glee in me, only the quiet settlement of cause and effect. Choices were sentences, they ended with periods. That week, a small package appeared at the post office, no return address. Inside lay the bundle of David's letters, the ribbon replaced but the paper the same. A note and signed. "I took these and shouldn't have. I'm sorry." My hands trembled. I sat on the bench outside and breathed in the smell of old paper, sun and sea. The letters were a shoreline I had thought washed away. I carried them home and placed them back in the cedar chest. Some restorations arrive without apology spoken aloud. Even so, the act carried weight. Laura noticed my quiet. "Over soup," she asked. "Good news or hard?" Both, I said, and told her about the package. She nodded. Then you've been given back what was always yours. The next weeks filled with ordinary brightness. I took photographs of fishermen mending nets and of fog lifting off the mill pond. The adult students in my literacy group read a full article aloud for the first time. When they finished, we laughed like people arriving at a station after a long, careful ride. I sewed the last squares of my quilt and stitched a small blue circle in one corner. A secret image of the mug that had carried me across hard mornings. One evening, as I returned from the pier, a car idled at the curb by my trailer. The license plate was from out of state. Emily stepped out. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold. For a moment we only looked at one another, 2 points on a line drawn years ago. "Mom," she said. "Please." I stood on the porch, the key warm in my hand. The lavender pot trembled in the wind. "I'm sober," she said quickly, as if measuring the ground. "I have a job. Tom and I aren't together." I wanted to say I'm sorry. There was no Orlando sun in her voice now, no smile drawn over any O. She reached into her bag and brought out a photograph. Me younger, holding her at 7, both of us squinting at the lake. "I should have protected you," she whispered. The air between us held the weight of years. I felt my pulse steady to the sound of the sea. I thought of the women in the workshop, the word no spoken as a full sentence, and of the children who listened for my voice on Wednesdays. I thought of Sue asking if I was her grandma now, and of the letters returned like shells after a storm. "I accept your apology," I said, "and I wish you well." I let the words settle, true and complete. But my boundary remains. She nodded, tears unspilling. "Can I give you something?" From the car she lifted a box. "The wedding photos, the lace tablecloth, the vase for the lavender. They're yours." I took the box and set it inside the door. "Thank you for returning them." "Will you ever call?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "For now, this is what I can do." We stood with the distance measured, not by anger, but by care for the life I had built. She touched her coat buttons as if counting, then said, "You look strong." It was the truest thing she'd ever told me. She got back in the car and drove away slowly, the taillights disappearing into rain. Inside, I unwrapped the vase and placed it on the table. I filled it with water and from the porch, clipped 3 lavender stems. The scent lifted into the warm air. I sat in the green chair, opened my notebook and wrote the date in a single line. I kept my name, my keys, my peace. Outside, the rain thinned. The tide turned and so did I, softly. The weeks after Emily's visit felt strangely weightless, as if a door I had kept bolted for years had been opened just long enough to let in a gust of air. I replayed the scene often. Her coat too thin, her voice stripped of the confidence that once filled rooms. I had accepted her apology, but I had not invited her back into my life. That distinction mattered. Forgiveness and boundaries are not opposites. They are threads of the same fabric. The box she had returned sat on my table for days. I unpacked it slowly. The wedding photos, David in his navy suit, me in lace, our smiles unguarded, were slipped back into their frames. The tablecloth I washed, its scent of lemon soap replacing the years of neglect. The vase I filled again with lavender. Each object felt like a small restoration, not of the house I had lost, but of the woman I still was. At the library, Sue noticed the change in me. "You smile more," she said. I touched her hair and replied, "That's because I feel more at home." She nodded as if she had known all along. Children sense balance before adults name it. The literacy group grew. New students joined, some shy, some eager. One man read a letter he had written to his grandson. The words were simple, but the pride in his voice filled the room. I told him, "Language is not decoration. It is connection." Watching him fold the letter into an envelope, I thought of Emily's last note, folded into my binder. One letter severed ties. Another built them. Paper carries weight depending on the hand that writes it. My walks along the pier became longer. I carried the second-hand camera and photographed fishermen, children with ice cream cones, gulls balanced on pilings. Once a woman asked if I was an artist. I smiled and said, "Just someone who wants to remember." That was true. Each photograph was a way of proving that life after loss is not empty. It is textured, layered, worth noticing. In October, Laura invited me to a harvest fair. The town square was filled with stalls, jars of jam, knitted hats, carved pumpkins. Music drifted from a small stage. Sue tugged my hand toward the rides, her laughter spilling out like bells. I stood there, the air crisp with cider and wood smoke, and felt something I had not known in years: belonging without cost. No one there expected my money, my labor, or my silence. They wanted only my company. That night Laura walked me home. "I've never seen Sue so attached to anyone," she said. I hesitated, unsure if she expected more. But her smile was calm, without pressure. "She calls you her second grandma," Laura added. My throat tightened. I whispered, "That's an honor." The binder remained under the desk, closed. Its presence was enough. Evidence, record, history. It guarded me without needing to be opened. I understood now that my life was not defined by betrayal, but by what I had chosen afterward. Still, I sometimes dreamt of the hospital. The machines, the antiseptic air, the note on the nightstand. In the dream, I turned the page over and found no words. I always woke before discovering more. Perhaps that was the point. Some notes end before they explain themselves. One afternoon, Ruth from the quilting circle stopped me. "You've changed," she said. "When you came here, you carried a shadow. Now you walk lighter." I thought of Emily's words, "You look strong," and realized they had both noticed the same truth. Strength is not loud, it is steady. In late November, I received a letter with a return address I did not recognize. It was from a woman in Springfield, a former neighbor. She wrote, "We miss you at church. People still talk about how you stood up for yourself. Some wish they had done the same in their families." I folded the letter and set it aside. Strength, I realized, is contagious. When one person sets a boundary, others learn they can too. Winter came again, softer this time. My quilt lay across the bed. Its blue circle a secret emblem of survival. Sue's lighthouse drawing hung on the wall above my desk. The vase of lavender dried but kept its fragrance. My days passed in simple tasks: reading, teaching, sewing, walking. And beneath them all ran a current of gratitude. Not for what I had endured, but for the self I had recovered. On the last day of the year, I stood on the pier as fireworks bloomed faintly across the harbor. Families gathered, children squealed, and couples held hands. I stood alone but not lonely. I whispered into the night air, "This is my second life." The sea answered with its steady breath, in and out, endless. I no longer measure my life by what was taken. I measure it by what I've kept. My name, my voice, my peace. The ICU bed, the note, the staged room's closed chapter. What stays open is the lavender on my porch, Sue's hand in mine, Harborview mornings quiet as prayer. I accepted my daughter's apology and kept my boundary. That is not cruelty. It is care for the small, steady flame that is mine. If you have been used, dismissed, or left behind, listen. You can still claim yourself, gather your papers, change the locks, choose your breath. Begin where you are. Choose one true thing and keep it. Keep another tomorrow. Call it a life. They tried to bury me under signatures and silence. I began again, and beginning held more light than I feared. If this touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength. You are not late. You are not broken. You are worthy of a quiet future. I keep a blue mug, lavender, a key in my palm, the sea breathing steady in mine.